What's up guys, it's Light Spiral here, and today I wanted to make a video that I don't want to say it's like a follow-up on yesterday's video, but it's kind of related to yesterday's video, and you saw in the title and the thumbnail, these are my top 5 Spectra replacement monsters. Now in terms of ordering them 1 to 5, it's kind of hard to do because some of these replace Spectra in ToA and some of them will replace Spectra in Dragons. So the ranking is pretty arbitrary, but it's called a top 5, so I will just place them in a rough order. So yesterday I explained why I didn't really like Spectra very much. And if you want to check out that video before this, you can feel free to check it out. I will try to remember to leave a link to it in the description. So at the number 5 spot, I'm going to pick Loopinus, the Wind Magic Knight. So a quick thing I want to mention, I personally don't think that Loopinus is really that great, and I wouldn't bother 6-starring her, but she can do her job at 5-star in terms of ToA normal 100. So if any of you guys are trying to use Spectra in your ToA normal team and you haven't built him yet, I would recommend building the Lapis over the Spectra, although in reality, I don't think that the Loopinus is really too much of a better option. So Loopinus has the AoE attack speed slow on the first skill. It's only a 50% chance to land, so of course it's inconsistent, but it is every turn if you want it to be. Second skill is a silence, which is really not too useful for ToA 100. Maybe it's useful in some of the other stages, but it's not too great. And the third skill is actually pretty decent. It's like Lapis's first skill, but it's a 100% chance to decrease attack gauge instead of 50, and it does damage proportionate to max HP. And for those who are wondering, the damage is not too far off from Spectra's damage. So I'm sure you guys can see how she's pretty similar to Spectra. AoE, attack speed, slow, and max HP damage, and it's pretty similar damage to Spectra. But why I don't like her is pretty similar to why I don't like Spectra. It's that she doesn't bring too much to the table. Of course, attack speed slow is actually super nice, and if you think you need it, by all means you can use her. If you put her on Despair, her first and third skill are AoE, so you'll get Despair stuns, you'll get attack speed slows, you'll get attack gauge reduction. I just don't think her kit brings too much to the table. I've seen people use her in Dragons B10 teams, and actually I've seen some pretty interesting teams with her that seem okay. So if you guys want to use her, I'm not going to tell you don't use her, don't 6-star her, but she's 5th for a reason. So the next monster on this list is Megan. I actually think Megan's a super good monster, but she's down this far on the list because she doesn't really do the same thing Spectra does at all. So of course, some of you guys use teams with Spectra and Megan, and if that's the case, Megan obviously wouldn't be a replacement for Spectra, but that's why there's 5 monsters on here. You don't need 5 Spectra replacements, you only need 1. But Megan's first skill does a dot, it's cool, but nothing too special. Second skill will strip, which is actually useful in Dragons B10. This is not really a good replacement in ToA for Spectra, but in Dragons it is. The AoE speed slow makes it so the right crystal's immunity goes off less often, and removing the beneficial effect is not the same as preventing the right tower from moving, but it's pretty similar. When the right tower moves, it'll still cleanse the boss, but you can at least strip it again quick. And I know pretty much all you guys watching this are going to be using a Bella, or you don't care about strip. But so if you're using a Bella and a Megan, you've got plenty of strip and you don't need to worry too much about the right tower, although it will cleanse the boss, so sometimes that can be problematic. And then this third skill will do a defense buff, it'll do an attack buff, so if you're using monsters that need to be a little tankier, defense is going to help, and if you have stuff like Sig and Verd and Theo or whatever in your team, it'll help you do a little more damage, kill the boss quicker, so you don't need the Spectra damage. Megan is not too much tankier than Spectra, so for some of you guys that were kind of upset that I said Spectra's too stat hungry, Megan isn't really that much tankier, but she's not a stat hungry, she doesn't need crit rate, she doesn't need crit damage, and with the Megan, you likely won't regret building one even if you 6-star it, because everyone and their mom uses Bernard, Megan, Double Lucian in Arena Offense. So those of you who get lucky enough to pull up a stat, you're going to regret 6-starring the Megan, but if you didn't pull up a stat, then you probably won't ever regret the Megan, or unless you just don't like Lucian teams. So the next monster on this list is a Chara. His first skill will strip decently reliably, which is actually super nice in Dragons B10. Second skill is reusable in 2 turns, you should note. AoE, attack speed slow, 100% chance to land, and it does damage proportionate to his max HP. Not even close to the damage Spectra will do, but it's still a little bit of damage. And the third skill also does a little bit of damage, but I wouldn't really bother with it. But it also does an AoE defense break and dots. So I'm sure you guys can see where this is a Spectra replacement. Of course, he doesn't do the damage that Spectra is going to do, but he's going to bring a strip for your Dragons B10 team. He's going to bring slow, dots, and defense break for the Dragons B10 team. And as for the ToA team, he's pretty much better than Spectra and ToA. Of course, sometimes Spectra is your only damage dealer on the boss stages, such as floor 100 is kind of like the main thing I think of when I think of Spectra as a damage dealer. So by no means will Chara do the damage that Spectra is going to do, but outside of that, he's really a lot better. He's Dark Element, so he's not going to glance, so sometimes you do want the harmless effects like on the Ragdoll stage, but Ragdoll stage is one stage. But this is reusable in 2 turns, so if you miss something and you violent, then the next turn you're going to have it again. And if you don't violent because you have him on Despair, because he does double attacks and they're both actually attack, they're not harmless, running him on Despair is actually a good option because you have 2 AoE attacks that are both going to have a chance to Despair stun. And on top of the Despair stun, they'll be doing stuff like speed debuff, dots, defense break. It's really a pretty solid. So for the first and second place, I didn't really know how to judge them because one of them is my first choice replacement for Dragons B10 and one of them is my first choice replacement for ToA. So right here I have Hua on the screen, and obviously she's the Dragons B10 choice monster. And then next I have Arya, which is the ToA choice monster. So I'll just talk about the Hua first, I guess. So when you max her skills, this is an 80% chance to land the speed debuff. It's single target, so yeah, it's not going to slow the right tower. And then she'll also do a dot. And you guys know what Hua's passive does probably. Decrease attack gauge every time she attacks by 25%. And she has a 20% to get not a violent proc, but it's like an extra turn, like a ray out kind of effect. So some of you might think she doesn't really count as a Spectra replacement because she's not AoE speed debuff, and a big part of Spectra's kit is decreasing the speed on the right tower. But Hua will do more consistent damage, much more consistent attack gauge reduction. And so if you can combine a Hua with a stripper or maybe 2 strippers, the boss isn't going to move whether he gets immunity or not. Because Hua is going to be so reliable at decreasing attack gauge, assuming your team's fast enough that the boss isn't going to move as long as you can keep immunity off of him pretty consistently. So if you were really concerned about like making sure the boss didn't move even once, using something like Chara and Hua in a team together, although Chara is not really your choice Dragons B10 monsters once you leave a beginner's team, but everyone's at a beginner's team at some point, and even some kind of like middle game teams would use a Chara, but Chara and Hua, AoE attack speed slow. If Chara misses it, in 2 turns he can try again, as well as strip from Chara. You're probably using Bella, so strip from Bella and Hua. You don't really have to worry too much about the boss moving. So I think you guys can understand how this Hua is being called a Spectra replacement, even though she doesn't do AoE attack gauge decrease. In Dragons B10, not really in ToA, but in Dragons B10, I do think Hua is a much better option than Spectra. If you have her, of course. And then for ToA, this Arya pick to me just seems pretty obvious why you'd want Arya over Spectra, although some people still use Spectra over Arya. So I'm going to assume you've maxed her skills, but the first skill will sleep with an 80% chance, which is extremely high, and if she sleeps, she gets 50% attack bar, so she ends up getting a lot of turns, and she does a lot of CC with just her first skill. Honestly, her second skill doesn't really do anything too special. On the Lyrith boss stage, as well as the, whatever the guy is, Athtaros or something, the HP block is actually pretty useful, but other than those 2 stages, I don't ever really find myself using the second skill. And then this third skill is what's pretty much like Spectra. It's 4 turn cooldown instead of 3 turn like Spectra's, but instead of just doing a speed decrease, it also does a glancing hit, so if you miss one or the other, you'll still be okay. And if you land both of them, you're in an even better situation. Also, Arya and all the Succubus, none of their skills wake monsters out of sleep, so you can sleep people with the first skill and then proceed to do this skill and not wake them. And for the most part, it's better to have attacks that aren't harmless in ToA so you can proc Despair stuns. So in Arya, put her on Despair, not only is she going to speed decrease and glancing hit and sleep, she'll also have a chance to despair stun. In terms of using Arya in Dragons B10, I wouldn't say it's worth it at all because the only thing you're using her for is the AoE speed decrease, which is on a 4-turn cooldown. Stuff like Chara, which I mentioned earlier, has a 2-turn cooldown on AoE speed debuff, so don't bother with Arya in Dragons B10. She's not a Dragons B10 monster. So overall, some of you guys might be kind of upset that my Spectra replacement doesn't work in Dragons and in ToA. And what I would say to that is, yeah, it might be a bummer to have to make 2 monsters, but it's better to make 2 monsters that actually work and work well than to make 1 monster that doesn't work, throw them in storage, and then make 2 monsters that work well. Like I said in my last video, if you have Spectra already and you use him and you clear Dragons B10, fine, and you clear ToA 100 hard, fine, then keep using him. There's no reason not to keep using him. But for those of you guys who are maybe having trouble in those areas or are debating whether to 6-star Spectra, my thought is that Spectra is not your key. If you guys have any other monsters that you think should have been mentioned on this, and I'm sure I don't need to ask you guys to tell me if my guesses were bad, then please feel free to leave those in the comment section. But that's really all I have for today though, guys. So may the best of your todays be the worst of your tomorrows.